Good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, the preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ, Mark Mitchell, and I'm joined, as always, by Steve Fox, a minister for over 50 years. Well,
I started when I was 6.
yeah. Yeah, okay. We'll let you go with that. Tell me, how's everything going?
Well, it's not going very well if you look outside. The country is just, we're in this virus epidemic, and then we got fires, and then we got floods, and then we got winter storms. And the country, from a physical standpoint, is in pretty bad shape. And all of us probably know somebody who's been sick, or some of us know people who've died of the virus. And just when you get to the place where you think we're going to handle this, then other things start cropping up too, and it's kind of depressing. But you just got to hold on. I think hope is one of those words that we need to grab a hold of.
Yes, absolutely. I guess everybody's perspective on, not to say that the circumstances that we're in are not difficult and very, in some ways, dangerous. I have a preaching friend of mine, he says, who's part scientist, said, the Earth's a dangerous place. There's species that die off every year. There's events that happen that kill people, animals, destroy parts of the functions of the planet. This can be a dangerous place.
You know what's the most dangerous place to be in our time? In the womb of a woman.
Well,
because a lot of those don't have a chance.
Yeah. There's, of course, now that's a whole nother. You opened up a whole nother chasm that we could.
Well, I'll close it with this. You know what twins are called, don't you? Womb mates.
All right, we're going to get serious now, if that's even possible. And if you would like to turn your Bibles to Revelations chapter 20, we're going to be beginning to read in verse 7. If you want to get caught up with where we are, and in order that we don't get into greater long discussions, go back and look at the previous one to catch up on verses 1 through 6. But we will begin reading in verse 7. Do you want to read, or you want me to read?
Go ahead.
All right.
You did such a good job last week with the 1,000 years.
I did.
It's mentioned in here 6 times.
Yeah. And but I'm not Charlton Heston, and I understand he was a big standout Sunday morning.
He was a big standout.
When the class was being had, and Chuck had the reading going on, and he used his phone. Kelly said it was Charlton Heston, but I don't know.
Oh, I didn't even hear that.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, verse 7. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Yeah. There's a bunch of theology here that comes into serious crosshairs.
Well, let me introduce this chapter again by very, very briefly. And I hope this clears up a little bit. I hope this doesn't muddy the water. But
no chance of that.
This chapter that we're studying has basically the same idea as the whole book does. And there are basically 4 interpretations of the entire book, and those 4 interpretations can fit into Revelation 20 as you read it. And it all depends on where you grew up, what you grew up with, who taught you when you were a little kid, what church you grew up when you were a little kid. There are basically four principal interpretations. One is a preterist view, which we've talked about, which people think everything happened in the past. If you want to read an excellent book on that, read Foy Wallace's The Book of Revelation. Also, James Stewart Russell wrote a commentary. He's a preterist. The Scofield Bible and Hal Lindsey are examples of premillennialists, meaning that Jesus is going to return before the millennium. There's the post-millennium idea, and if you want to read that, read Alexander Campbell. Alexander Campbell's his paper was called The Millennial Harbinger. Millennial Harbinger, the 1,000-year harbinger. And he thought as soon as we all do very well, then that's when the world's going to end. That's when Jesus is going to come, when we get to the... But then something happened. That idea was crushed by World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, Hiroshima. So there are a lot of people who are post-millennialists, and then there's another group called the amillennialists. They don't believe there's going to be a millennium. That's just a symbol of something. So you've got four different ideas in the whole book, and then you've got four different ideas in Revelation 20. And that's why 20 is so difficult, because it goes back and forth between different scenes, and it, we'll talk about different ideas in different paragraphs. Mm-hmm. It's tough to put them all together, but that's what we're here for.
Yeah, because what I just made the comment earlier, we have declarations being stated in Revelation chapter 20, and they kind of, as you point out, they can be applied to all of the various views.
Yeah.
But still yet not clear enough that you could grab a hold of it and say, yeah, that's exactly what that means. It's still kind of very broad in its discussion. Especially given the fact that when the 1,000 years is over, and who knows, okay, from a preterist view, that's already happened. Historical view, we're not sure. And post-futurist is, okay, it hasn't happened yet. Yeah. There's going to be that defining moment when it happens. And we're going to see this taking the first few verses out when he, will recognize the fact that he's no longer here. But this, of course, is speaking of when that 1,000 years is over. We've got this huge war that's going to happen, and we're going to see people killed. I mean, taken away, destroyed, and the devil to be judged, and the beast and the false prophet are going to be, they're going to be devoured and destroyed in a judgment fashion. Very harsh.
I was in, Susie and I were in a restaurant in Central Ohio several years ago, and this guy had a baseball cap on, and I looked over and said, "It's about time." So I went over to ask him, I said, "Sir, can I ask you what your hat is?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm a preterist." And I said, "Yeah?" And he said, "So I found this hat, I don't know where he got it, but he said, it's about time." And that's what Revelation is. It's about time. and you got to figure out where that time is. Was it 2,000 years ago? Is it continuing to happen right now? Is everything going to happen in the future? It's about time. And then chapter 20 is the same thing. A succession of different things that are going to happen for 1,000 years. All the three that we looked at believe that that's a literal 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. And then amillennialists believe, no, it's just a symbol of something. It's not literally 1,000 years.
Yeah, to narrow down the time frame is actually quite difficult, given the fact that there's been roughly 2,000 years since we know Jesus came and was resurrected. And we know that there is a period of time where this is where the preterist and the futurist and even the historical, it seems as at the end of this great war, Satan was thrown into the lake of burning fire.
And he is
So that means he's not here.
tormented day and night.
Yeah. So, see, this is where it gets difficult being if you have a preterist view, because from all indication, Satan's still around.
Yeah. And there's going to be a time when he's released a little bit more. If he's not released now, what in the world is it going to be like when he's released later?
Well, that's my point. Is with the preterist, if all this stuff has already happened, I still see evidence of Satan in this world.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that I think gets confusing in all the various views, that if Satan has been judged and been placed in the lake of burning fire along with the beast and the false prophet, which for all indications they are an historical reference if we take into account what happened in the very first beginning of Revelation chapter 1, where it says these things are about to happen. And the beast and the false prophet were very poignant talked about in those early chapters, but do you think then, how is it possible that verses 7 through 10, not talking about a actual close to the end of the world scenario?
No.
Okay, then.
I don't think that's in chapter 20. I think that's in a lot of other New Testament chapters, but not here.
But then what do you do with the devil thrown into the lake of burning sulfur?
And he's gone.
So you're saying he's not here anymore?
He's destroyed. That's what I'm saying. It's supposed to be released for a little bit. Maybe he was released, and we're in the middle of the little bit.
Well, this is talking about, verse 7 begins, when the 1,000 years...
Are we recording this?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, no, I don't believe that at all. What do you believe about that?
Do you want to start over?
No, we can go from here. And the two people that are watching will really get enjoyment from this.
Okay. Well, when the 1,000 years talks about are over, Satan's released from his prison. And then there's this war that happens. And at the end of that moment, Satan then is thrown into the lake of burning sulfur along with the beast and the false prophet who'd already been thrown in there. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. How is that not an end of time concept?
If you take that verse at face value, that verse has to be something that's in our future.
Has to be.
It has to be. Because Satan, during the time of Jesus, during the time of his ministry or in the first century, Satan wasn't destroyed.
Yeah. Because here's the thing.
Satan's done his work for thousands of years.
Because this was being written to people who weren't going to live 1,000 years. But they were going to understand that Satan was going, when this early battle that Revelations 1 through 18 is talking about, when the people of the Christians and those who Satan had tormented and frustrated, and the beast and the prophet, the false prophet, were doing all their damage, they're dealt with. But Satan still isn't, other than the fact that he's put in, evidently, some kind of prison. And of course, 1,000 years...
and if it's literal, Satan didn't drink anything for...
1,000 years.
Drink or eat or anything for 1,000 years, if that's literal.
Yeah. So, we don't know what that means, necessarily. But we do know that whatever it meant, it did have a literal time limit to it.
Yes.
Because otherwise, he would never been released. And so, he was put back.
And it doesn't say in the text either why he was released. It just gave him a little more time. When you look at these three 3 or 4 interpretations like we looked at a while ago. I think I've discussed this with you, Mark. About 35 years ago, several guys from our church went to Northern Ohio to go to a prophecy seminar. And we were sitting there eating supper that night, the first night of the seminar. And these two guys, I knew they had a little bit different view of each other in Revelation 20. And they started talking, people around the table started talking about it. And this one guy just got fed up with the discussion. He got up and started to walk away. He said, well, I don't know what you guys are arguing about because it's not the end of the world. And this other guy across from the table said, yeah, pretty much is. And it is.
It's about the end of the world. It's not the end of the world if we don't agree.
Yes, it's about the end of the world, and you have to figure out, is he talking about the end of the Jewish world, or is he talking about what we refer to as the end of time, or the end of the world which is in our future, and then what's going to happen after that?
Yeah.
So there are so many things here that could be symbols or are symbols that you're trying to put the pieces in a puzzle. And sometimes the pieces don't fit very well at all.
And of course, then you've got the symbolic understanding of Gog and Magog that comes from Ezekiel, and I think it's also mentioned. Is it also mentioned in Jeremiah?
There are several passages in Daniel that are referred to in Revelation 20.
Yeah, but I mean, people want to make out that they're representative of somebody, though we know who, we don't know, but much in the same way, the same language as the four corners of the earth. I mean, we grab that, okay, that's representative of, that means the whole world. That means from everywhere to everywhere. It all reaches. And then, we got this battle where the sand, the number's greater than the sand on the seashore. So, I mean, we've got all kinds of symbolisms that speak to this great battle. But this battle could have already happened.
Yes.
But we don't know.
And it's hard to see Jesus riding on a white horse with a sword killing people.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult concept to see.
Yeah.
Because all these things you have in the Gospels about, I came to bring peace, I came to make the world a better place. Well, that's not making the world a better place.
No. But given the context of what's going to happen at the very end, I remember having a discussion with someone as it pertains to, why was Satan always the way he was at the end? Because there is evidently, and Jesus speaks to it, not directly, but kind of indirectly, that, Satan was who he was, but then he became unbearable for God to even have around, so he was cast from heaven. Okay? And even in the encounter that Satan had with Jesus, there's the idea of that there was sort of like, okay, I'll give you all this if you just agree that I was right, or you're going to worship me, or whichever way you want to go with that. But when Paul says in Ephesians that Jesus triumphant over Satan, that had to be someone whose pride was his downfall, had to be difficult to the extent that no wonder he was tormenting everybody in this first century. That Jesus actually was getting what he wanted, and Satan couldn't stop it.
He was, as a symbol, he was talking about that battle that would take place. And here's something that'll keep you awake at night. If the Bible's true, and I think it is, about Satan rebelling and taking some angels with him, and that's how Satan got started, what's the possibility that somebody else is in heaven that might end up saying, I don't want to follow this leadership, I want my own kingdom.
I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like, instead of having two parties, let's throw in three.
You mean political parties?
Yeah. But, that's what I'm saying. I mean, right now we have two opposing sides, and we know which one's white hat, which one's the villain's hat. But today, that's the part sometimes that you wonder, is Satan still moving people? The difference is now, though, Jesus settled so much of the conflict that began, as one theologian that I respect a great deal.
Well, thank you.
Said, Satan doesn't like humans, and when he understood that God's relationship with humans, that he was going to have to act as a servant toward us, that was, in his pride, inconceivable. As he understood it, as Hebrews points out, we were made a little lower than the angels. But yet here is angels having to serve us on the behest of God.
Well, when we get done with this, you have to promise me that we're going to start a study to find out whether Satan has free will or not.
Well, we know he does.
And did Jesus have free will? That would be interesting too. I'm not going to be there on those days, but you can discuss it.
Do you have anything else you want to?
No, I'm just impressed with. I didn't realize this. The term 1,000 years is in here a lot, and it could be a symbol or it could be something literal. But I don't see any way to figure out if that is literal or if that's figurative. But it's in there a lot, so it's important. And you've got the deception of all these people, of the nations, and they surround themselves with saints, and then it says, in the beloved city, fire came down from heaven and devoured them. This whole segment right here, and these ideas right here, come about from, we've noted in the past few weeks, there are judgment scenes all the way through here. And Revelation 20 is a big, big judgment scene. Might be the last judgment of all time.
Could be.
Could be.
I mean, it's representative of a conclusion, but we don't know if it's been a ongoing conclusion or a pinpointed conclusion, or it definitely gives reference to it's also can be used for the final conclusion.
Yeah.
So,
and we shouldn't skip over verse 10, because verse 10 has been argued. There are, I believe, this is my personal opinion, you can study it for yourself and figure out whether I'm right or wrong. I do not believe hell is what I was taught when I was growing up.
Eternal punishment?
I didn't think, would a father just continually jab his son, just keep poking his son forever?
Yeah.
Would God do that with a person? There are at least 4 verses in the New Testament that make it sound like it's eternal torment. The torment goes on day and night forever, just like this.
Just like this one.
Just like that one. But it makes more sense to me to look at the words like perish or consumed, or what we're going to look at in a little bit here, the second death. We die once, and some people are going to die twice. So You've got all these different ideas about hell, but it says that what's going to happen to Satan, and like you brought up a little while ago, then what happens to him afterwards? They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. That is, according to John's prophecy right here, that's the beast, the false prophet, and Satan.
Doesn't mean everybody.
No.
We know those 3 are singled out.
Specific.
That they're going to be tormented day and night. And I'm sure that that's also reserved for his hosts, angels, too.
Yeah.
I mean, his comrades who, as I heard one minister put it, Satan has an advantage over humans. He saw God. He knew who God was. to choose to oppose God is totally different than what you and I, our choices are being manipulated all the time by the enemy of God.
Yeah.
So
And
we're given a little bit more leadway.
Those are the two judgments. There's going to be a judgment, and I know this, I'm not trying to demean the content of the Bible at all, but there's the good guys and the bad guys.
Yeah.
And when those judgments take place, you're on one side or the other.
Yeah.
And luckily, God will make that call.
Well, there's also evidently a case that you could be made that there's bad and then there's really bad. You want to think about it? Just go ahead and jump into verse 11, or
I'll read.
okay.
And I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven had fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every one of them, according to their deeds. Man, we could spend 5 hours on that right there. And death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Judgment after judgment after judgment, all the way down through here.
Yeah, and giving various different, it's like those who died in the sea and those who died on the earth were stored in two different places, so to speak, but we know that's
Every time I read that, I think of pirates or people who lived on the sea
Davy's
all the time in a
Lager.
boat. Yes. When somebody died, they threw them over.
They were fish bait.
They were done. They were fish bait. And if you carry that out, they become even worse than fish bait. But when they threw them over there, they were burying them at sea. And this says when this resurrection happens, when this first
They're
resurrection,
gathered.
they're going to be coming
Restored.
out of the, they're going to be restored. It's amazing.
Yeah. In all actuality, we're all going to eventually see that, but can you imagine if you're alive and the dead are raised? Now, listen, that's got to be,
If you're sitting there eating breakfast and Grandma and Grandpa walk in, and they've been dead for 40 years.
well, even take into consideration this, and this is the kind of thoughts that go through someone who thinks things a lot more than he should. This earth has been around for a long time. There are dead bodies everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, can you imagine sitting in your living room? The moment happens, the next thing you know, up to the floor comes this body because it was buried down in the ground underneath that where you built your house. Now, I'm not meaning to scare anybody, but we don't know where all the bodies are buried, much like
No.
the expression goes in The Godfather. But this is some kind of moment. Now, we know that this is talking about the last judgment scene. I mean, there is no. That's
Jesus
reason.
talked about the resurrection of the good and the bad. Now, there's another time where you have the judgment and you have those two considerations.
Yeah.
And it's all the way through here, too.
Yep. So we are, and this going back to there's a ledger, there's an accounting, which gives credence to the fact of when all the accounting and terms that's used at the death of Jesus Christ, that the sins are washed away, blocked off, never to be held accountable again. But yet, if you don't have the blood of Jesus Christ, your sins are still accounted for, even though they could be erased like that.
This verse 12 is really interesting because there are two books. And preceding this, there's a couple of verses that say God chose certain individuals to help him judge. And I'm not really sure what that means. I know that's a shock to our audience, but I'm not sure I know what that means, that in verse 11, there was no place found for these people, so they were resurrected. And the great and the small, that means everybody, standing before the throne, and books were open. So the first book that was open, God says, I want some individuals to help me judge these people. I'm not sure which direction that goes, but that's what it says. And then it says they were judged, every one of them, this is 13b, they were judged, every one of them, according to their deeds. Well, those of us who believe greatly in the concept of salvation by grace, you read that and you go, what? People are going to be judged by their deeds, evil or good?
Good.
So there's some kind of concept in the mind of God that says this person lived a good life, this person did not.
Yeah. Well, there's also the part where you take another book was open, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to what they had done as recorded in the books. There's actually two distinctions here. In the very beginning, there is the group of books, and then there is the book that has the book of life. Recorded.
And isn't it called the book of the Lamb's Book of Life? Is that what it's called?
In certain...
I thought it was in here too.
Well, it's the second part of verse 12. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. Now that could have been where Lamb's Book of Life.
Now somewhere in my head I got sticking there that it's called the Lamb's Book of Life, but I don't see it right now. Indicating that the Lamb is the one who's going to make the judgment.
Well, also that it was the ones who had accepted the Lamb. You know, had taken as much, you know.
Well, we're going to find that before we go home.
Well, but given...
Because I don't want to come across with the idea that I'm wrong about something.
That's why, to me, if you study the Old Testament and you grasp the Passover moment to the extent of what exactly it meant as God's real visual illustration of what judgment looked like, because all they had to do was have the blood of a lamb on the doorpost and the death passed them by. That's exactly what's being said right here. Those who death is passed by have whose blood on their doorpost.
Yep.
But the others are, as you point out very clearly, or that we've talked about, they have a second death.
Yes. Well, the first death is talked about in 12. I saw the dead,
Yep.
the great and the small. Who would be the great and the small? Everybody.
Made no difference.
I would be the great and you would be the small.
That'd be about right.
Standing before the throne, and the books were opened. Okay, here's what Mark referred to as things actually being written down in a book. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead, those small and great, were judged from the things which were written in the books according to their deeds.
Yeah, so that's the book that has the accounting procedures of those who never got their name written in the book of life.
Yeah.
And there is an accounting moment. There is that moment where, okay, give an account of what you've done.
And in one of the 7 letters, I can't remember which one it is, but in one of the 7 letters, God threatens them with, I will take away.
I will blot.
I will blot your name from the book of life.
That's right.
So, looks like it's been in there and erased somehow.
Yeah.
Well, this verse 13, it talks about judgment, and 14 it talks about judgment too. This is the second death. You have to die once, but you don't have to die twice. You don't have to be thrown in the lake of fire if you're fighting on the right team and following the one who's riding on this white horse. I started jury duty yesterday.
How appropriate.
Yes, and well, I'm glad they're not judging me on my peers, because my peers would be. But I started jury duty yesterday, and as I sat there waiting for the final, they went from 48 down to 23 down to 12, and as I sat there, listening for my name, or not listening for my name, I got thinking about what a great country we live in, because here was a guy who obviously did something wrong, and 12 people were going to listen to his story. 12 people were going to say, yes, that's the way that happened, or no, that's not the way that happened. Yes, the indictment should be carried out, or no, the indictment should be dropped. There are 12 people that are going to sit there and listen to that. And I thought, what a great country we live in, where that's the way we judge people.
Yeah.
And then I got thinking, there are countries where if you do something wrong or you do something against the government, we're going to take you out back and shoot you.
Yeah. We know what to do with you, your kind.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And so when I think about judgment, I think about that kind of judgment, that God is making the final call. The final call comes from the Lamb's Book of Life.
The reprieve, the grace, the mercies in the Lamb's Book of Life, but the accounting version is on the other collection of books. And the beauty of this, if to all those who are listening, and it doesn't take a life of perfection. It just takes a life of faith
and continuity.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, all you got to do is say, Lord, okay, you're my Lord, and I'll live my life according to your rule as a king.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it takes. But as we all know, that is hard.
Oh.
I mean, it's easy to say, as the verbiage is used in many movies, it's easy to give the knee, to bend down and say, you're my Lord. It's a whole different ball game to then to stand up and live like that's your oath. Mm-hmm. It's not always going to be easy, but that's the beauty of God's grace, is as long as you're pursuing that, and that's the beauty of God. He knows who is and who isn't. He knows who's doing it for show and who's not. He has that ability. He can see the heart of man and know. We have gone long. So we're going to stop right there. We're going to let you, if at the beginning of next week, hit on verses 14 and 15, because I know that that's going to be a longer discussion than we're prepared to have today. So, that will conclude this week's chapter 20, and hopefully next week we will begin there on verses 14 and 15 and move into chapter 21. Maybe, because this is some hard stuff here at the very last part of chapter 20. Well, listen, on behalf of Steve and I, we ask you to tune in to us next week, and if you have any questions or any comments, please do not hesitate to give us those questions and inquiries. On behalf of Steve and I, have a great week, and see you next time.